I remember being 9 or 10 years old, I think, with all of these ECG leads running all over the place, connected to me 24/7, even for months after surgery. And now we've had some companies come through our door where it's just a little app you get on your phone and then one tiny ECG lead, and that's it. And it sounds like you guys are a key example of that.
It's sort of the old story of necessity is the mother of invention. We develop algorithms for detecting changes in cardiovascular status. We deploy them in standalone monitors. Our new product called Argos Infinity. Often we will detect problems before the blood pressure drop. We took a long look at this protections that we needed to ensure that we had proper cybersecurity, because there's no going back. I've had scenarios where people were in the OR and we saw a change before they saw blood pooling in the surgical field, where seconds mattered and they had to initiate mass transfusion protocol to bring the person back to life, frankly. And if somebody's getting in there and they're monkeying with your system and then giving you the wrong information because they found a back door or whatever, your reputation is gone.
Cybersecurity is the number one reason that medical devices are getting kicked back. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Your usual hosts, myself, Trevor Slattery, and Christian Espinoza are here, as well as a very special guest that we have today, Marc Zemel. What we're going to talk about are some of the challenges that MedTech innovators and startups and manufacturers may face while moving into their cybersecurity journey and moving towards their submission pathway. Before we dive in too deep, I'll check in with everyone and see how everyone's doing today. I'll start with you, Christian. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I just got back from Kenya, so about 40 hours of travel. It's a little bit jet lagged. I got a little sunburn. At Kenya, where I was staying, is at altitude, and it's about 6,000 feet high. So I hung out at the plunge pool for about 15 minutes, and I guess because the altitude and the sun bounced off the water, got a little sunburn. Plus, you're driving around in these little vehicles all day in the wind, looking for the rhino and all the animals. So it was fun.
Well, a sunburn in December is never a bad thing.
Yeah, and plus I still wear these glasses. I don't like the way they look on video though, but I've got used to wearing these like blue blocker glasses or whatever, even though they don't look so cool.
Well, there you go. And how about yourself? How are you doing today, Marc?
I'm doing great. We just almost done wrapping up 2025, way ahead of plan, which was awesome. And looking forward to kicking off 2026 and continued growth for our Retia Medical.
Awesome. And where are you calling in from today?
Yeah, we're based in White Plains, New York, just north of New York City.
Trevor was just up in the area recently, weren't you, Trevor?
Yeah, just was out in New York for a couple of days and then up in Toronto. I actually just got back, I think, day before yesterday.
Nice. Well, let me know when you're in town.
How far from Lake Placid is that? I've done the Lake Placid
Lake
Ironman.
Placid is all the way north.
Oh, okay.
It's several hours, like 4 or 5 hours north of us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like New York's a bigger state than a lot of people realize. You kind of, if you're not from New York, you think about the city and then everything is just upstate until you get to Lake Ontario.
Upstate's a pretty far away though, it sounds like.
If you live in Manhattan, then where I am, which is Westchester County, is considered upstate, but it's really more like New York metro area. We're about half an hour into Upper West Side, so it's pretty funny.
The strictest definition I ever heard is anything past 125th Street is upstate.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
All right. Well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what Retia does?
Sure. So I am a co-founder and CEO of Retia Medical. I actually trained as a mechanical engineer. I got my master's from MIT and then worked in the semiconductor capital equipment industry for about a decade. And then I decided to move into MedTech. So I went back, got an MBA at Yale, worked at Becton Dickinson for a few years, and then decided to start my own company, which I've been running now. In May, it'll be 15 years, Retia Medical. I joke that we were two guys with slides. So licensed the technology, raised the capital, built the team, took us through FDA, CE mark, and now we are sold in 18 countries. In the US, we're sold by Medtronic. We're in 75 hospitals. It's been quite a ride and a lot more to do. We develop algorithms for detecting changes in cardiovascular status. That's fundamentally what we do. And then we deploy them either in standalone monitors, which was our historical product. And now what we'll probably talk a lot more about is our new product called Argos Infinity that we'll be rolling out in Q1 of 2026, pending FDA clearance. So we're in the middle of that process right now.
When you're talking about cardiovascular, because I had blood clots, would that help detect something like blood clots, or is it mainly like the heart muscle?
Yeah, so I say cardiovascular as sort of the broadest term. We particularly assess cardiac and circulatory function.
Okay.
So we're monitoring um, blood flow and the resistance of your arterial system, the amount of blood ejected with each heartbeat. When you think about what people typically will measure, they'll measure blood pressure. Uh, that's the easiest thing to measure. But
Hmm.
blood flow is what carries the oxygen to keep your vital organs alive. So historically, the way to measure this was by threading a catheter through your heart into the pulmonary artery. That's called the pulmonary artery catheter. And that would be the way that they would measure. They would measure flow by injecting cold saline and then measuring the change in temperature. And that would be the way they would infer the flow rate, which is it's like I call it a science experiment at the bedside. So what we do is we take that blood pressure signal that people get from an invasive arterial catheter, and then we run an algorithm using a sophisticated model of the circulation to calculate the blood flow, the vascular resistance, and all these other parameters that then are used by anesthesiologists, intensivists, critical care nurses to manage their patients more precisely, to diagnose what's wrong with the patient, and obviously to detect, patient deterioration. Often we will detect problems before the blood pressure drops. So it's an early warning system for your body, for your cardiovascular system.
So the blood pressure is less important than the blood flow, but they're sort of related, but not enough to make a prediction. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, blood pressure is a vital sign. If your mean blood pressure drops below 65 millimeters of mercury, every alarm, every bedside monitor will go off, right? That's an emergency.
Hmm.
Um, so, but typically that's a sign that already something was going wrong beforehand. And that's what we're picking up. That earlier, the technical term would be loss of perfusion. The perfusion is what's delivering that oxygen to your vital organs. Typically, like let's take an example if somebody's bleeding. And if you bleed and you're a relatively healthy person, you will squeeze your vessels down to maintain that pressure in your trunk at the expense of your, peripheral limbs, right? And so you might maintain your blood pressure for quite a while until you kind of fall off a cliff. Meanwhile, your blood flow is going down the whole time because it's not obviously coming back to your heart. It's leaking out. So we detect that change before the pressure drops.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting to me because I think, well, both Trevor and I have had, I guess, cardiac or blood issues. So, to me, it's
Mhm.
interesting to hear about this kind of technology. Wasn't it your heart? It was beating too fast. Is that the deal, Trevor?
Yeah, yeah. So I have Wolf Parkinson's White syndrome, and that led to quite a few complications when I was around 8 or 9.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
some very rare side effects. Luckily, nothing has emerged too quickly from there. But I know even, us being so involved with the cybersecurity and with the FDA process for medical devices, we get exposure to a lot of devices that are even intended to treat symptoms of Wolf Parkinson's White or manage it a little bit better instead of, I remember being whatever it was, 9 or 10 years old, I think, with all of these ECG leads running all over the place, connected to me 24/7, even for months after surgery. And now we've had some companies come through our door where it's just a little app you get on your phone and then one tiny ECG lead, and that's it. So it's
Yeah,
cool to see
nice.
how these things can evolve as time goes on for sure. And it sounds like you guys are a key example of that, taking something that used to be a little bit of a complicated, a very invasive, and a very difficult process and finding some ways to look at it a little bit more precisely and a little bit less science experimenty.
Yeah, I mean, if you think from the ECG world, think of that as measuring your electrical system, where you're saying to your heart, beat, 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 for however frequently you fire, right? And then we are telling you how much blood actually came out after your electrical system said, do something. So they're very complementary.
So earlier you were mentioning that your initial strategy was to have a monitor that you were producing and having this algorithm go within the monitor. And then you said that you were alluding that you're bringing this algorithm into some other technologies. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about what drove that shift for you and then what you're seeing as some of the variations between those two different models that you had.
Yeah, it's sort of the old story of necessity is the mother of invention. We came out with a box, right? And we're trying to get it into the hospital. First, we tried with some local distributors, then we tried selling direct. And then, we were able to get enough traction to then get Medtronic interested, which is wonderful. But selling the boxes for us meant like, you roll the ball all the way up the hill to all the stakeholders in the, hospital system, right? And you're gonna do, the amount of effort to sell 2 or 4, 6 or 10 boxes is, very, very significant. Long sales cycle and very, difficult to get capital, budget. And on the other hand, when we would go and show the monitor, let's take like a 16-bed ICU, right? Well, the in a CV ICU, every one of them has an A line, but they wouldn't be able to afford putting one of our monitors at every bed to start. So they'd buy 3 or 4, and then they'd buy another 4. It'd take them 5 years to get the proper bed coverage. So I'm looking here and I'm saying, they need it on every bed, but they can't get there right away because of capital constraints. And then you have all the problems, the complaints about, well, I don't want another screen at the bedside, right? And there's always, you walk into like a one of these, very, very complicated, you know, ORs with robots and lots of, anesthesia machine. There's like not a lot of room. Then you walk into a neuro ICU and, you don't even know where the patient is because there's so many different things. Like I counted one that had 15 screens, not to mention all the pumps, and other equipment there. So I was like, what if we could get the data that they want, right, at their fingertips, whatever screen they had, if it's on their phone, tablet, laptop, wherever. And could we then cover every bed in the hospital? And so the beauty of that is a couple things. One is it's meeting the clinical need that much more quickly. Number two, it's a bigger deal, right? So I mean, my expectation is that this is not going to be 5 times the effort. It's going to be more effort because IT gets more involved, but a lot of it was the clinical adoption and the trials and all the other things and then navigating the budgeting. That's all the same. But the bang for that is that we now cover 100 beds at a time or 500 beds at a time. So we piloted this project, we called it Argos Infinity, through their tele ICU, where they already had the infrastructure to monitor a lot of patients. So right now we're live on 400 beds, and in Q1 we'll be at 500 beds, right? And it's like, okay, now we're maximizing the possibilities of this algorithm to get it and make it available on every single clinician's hand. So that piece was sort of like a natural evolution of our understanding of the channel difficulties, right? Which, by the way, include the fact that the big companies in this space, they don't sell just a hemodynamic monitor. They sell a cerebral oximeter, or they sell a pulse oximeter, or they sell depth of anesthesia, or they sell, any number of other products. And then, they have that portfolio
Mhm.
that they bring to the hospital. And we're like, we'll go and they'll be like, we love your product, but I need these 3 other things that you don't have, so we're going with this other company." That happens all the time. Well, this is its own category. This is its own, we hope, and will apply for this breakthrough designation, from GPOs where, there's no such thing as hemodynamic monitoring software. That's not a thing in these categories. So it's like, okay, look, you guys can do what you want with your specialty boxes and disposables. And let's not forget that our major competitor, their list price for their new box is $100,000 and then $300 every time you use it.
Mhm.
Like that's not sustainable in today's healthcare environment. So it's never going to be at every bed. This is now changing not just the clinical workflow and making it reducing the friction for all the users, but it's changing the economic model to allow patients then to have data at every bed that not just makes it better for them, but it also leads to those potential improvements in critical care that we set out to do when we started the company. Because if you think about it, once you have all that data, then you can start to collect it and then you can start to develop new algorithms that detect even finer changes and other problems. Then you can start to develop care protocols on larger data sets. So think of it as ushering in the era of big data merged with physiology to transform critical care medicine. So this was a sort of a natural evolution and sort of an understanding of the necessity of both the clinical problem and the business problem that led us to go down this path of deploying in a software platform.
What is you said you've been doing this for 15 years, I believe you said earlier.
Yeah.
What's your overall like plan? You looking for 15 more years? You looking for, like to do something new or like what cuz 15 years is that's a fairly long time frame. I mean, you're bringing
Yeah.
something awesome to market. I was just curious like where you see yourself like, 5 or 10 years from now and Retia or what the next thing is.
Yeah, it's so funny because when I got in, I was like, "Oh, I'll do this for 5 or 7 years. I'll sell it and, get moving." The average MedTech company takes, I think, somewhere around 14 years for exit. Um, and, I have investors. I certainly would like to return money to them, but honestly, companies get bought, not sold. And so, what I think all the time is I'm just going to keep creating value, keep building the business. And if somebody does something and wants to have a conversation, I always talk to them. But at this point, it's really about two things. One is, uh, like I said, building the business, and the other thing is it's creating value at the clinic, right?
Mm,
Like we have a roadmap of algorithms that we want to roll out beyond just Argos Infinity, which is this, digital algorithm platform for critical care. I'm keep having fun doing that the next several years, and there's a lot more we can do in this space. A lot of unmet needs, a lot of things we can do, not just in sort of our traditional space, which is high risk OR and ICU, but we're on our roadmap. We're working on non-invasive algorithms, which will allow us to monitor people when they come into the emergency department, L&D, um, the CCU. Maybe they don't have an A line there. Step down units, PACU, the medium risk surgeries. We do that right, then we start to think about, maybe we even go in the pre-hospital, at home market. Again, all about assessing cardiac and circulatory function, which currently not well monitored outside the hospital. Well, you look at these things and there's only so much you can do with ECG, right? There's some things where it might be better to look at these things in combination. And if we did that and you didn't feel right, in women, for example, when they get a heart attack, it might feel like nausea or indigestion,
hmm.
right? And do you really want to go to the emergency department for 6 hours or 8 hours and before you figure out whether it's one or the other? Maybe I'd like to hook up some things and have it tell me you're fine or, you know, get in the car or call 911, right? And I see that as a game changer for, um, a lot of people, who really care about their health and who are investing in wearables today. And the beauty of this is we'll be validated in the high risk scenarios. So, Cleveland Clinic has 75 of our boxes. They use us all the time, now with the software platform. And if it's good enough for them, right, then why isn't it good enough for your grandma or
Yeah.
your uncle or whoever, right? If we get there, why wouldn't you put it on there?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just talking to Trevor earlier, before we started recording, and he has an Aura Ring. He just got one, I think. I used to have one back in the day. It was like 10 years ago, version 1.0 or something. But it measures your pulse. I don't think it measures your flow rate of your blood or anything, but it measures quite a few things. And you were concerned about the security of wearables in general and that ring, aren't you, Trevor? Like in what aspect?
Yeah, so with a lot of the information that it's collecting, when I wake up, I get a little score. It'll send it over to me on my phone, and it's collecting all sorts of information while I'm asleep, while I'm active, if I'm exercising, if I'm not exercising, but something else is causing my heart rate to go up. And so I'm not exactly sure what information, exactly how it's processing all of this. I know it's collecting some information about your pulse rate, your blood oxygen, things like that. And then it's trying to determine, like, if my pulse rate spikes and I'm not doing anything, I'm not moving, it probably means I'm stressed out about something instead of exercising. But one thing that I do think is unique about some of these wearable technologies is they're in a little bit less of a regulated space than Argos Infinity, for an example. That is a regulated algorithm. That's something that goes through FDA approval process. It's something where you have to address any security concerns around it as well. And so I know we were working with your team on the security considerations for the Argos Infinity and helping build out this documentation, all of the testing. But some of these wearables don't go through that same process. So I'm concerned about some of the safety risks that could potentially be there around the device. I have it on my to-do list for before the end of the year to try to hack into the Aura Ring and see what happens. Um,
It can't
but
do anything to you, though. It's just a monitoring device.
it's just a monitoring device. But if I can, it talks to my phone over Bluetooth. What if I can trick my phone into saying, "Oh, you're not stressed out. You can just keep going with that lifestyle," or "Oh, you're super stressed out. You need to change something that you're doing." It's giving you a score
The
and
fact that
recommendation.
if it's telling me I'm stressed out when I'm really just sitting here over and over, it would stress me out even more, I think.
That's what it does to me. But it'll give you little suggestions. Like last night, I got this dang, I was going on a walk just to get out of the house for a little bit, and I came back home and it says, "You should keep walking for a little bit longer." I went, "Oh, that's interesting." It'll try to give you some insight in one way or another. And obviously this is a pretty harmless example. These are a little bit of a gimmick. It's fun to see, but you're not really making any decisions off of it. But once you're moving into those decisions, then it's very important to make sure you're covering all of your bases with proving these are safe and secure.
Yeah, I think wearables are interesting, and I should probably get one because my blood pressure has been high. It's only high when I go to the doctor. I think it's like one of those things that I know they're going to take my blood pressure, so I try to breathe a certain way, but it probably makes it worse. So it's high, but then I measure it at home all the time as normal. So it's like this
Yeah,
weird
well,
thing.
there's the white coat effect, white coat hypertension, but also you go into some of these places and it's not always measured correctly. You got to do about 11 things correctly. Like make sure emptied your bladder. You got to be in a dark room, no talking. Feet on the floor, your arms supported correct. There's several things. So I'm not surprised. You get in there and the nurse is like, meh, meh, and you're fine, or your little eye, whatever. Like, it kinda
That's a
I'm
common
geeky
thing. It
about
sounds
this
like.
stuff, and it irks me, but, the reality is if you look a little high, you do what you do, which is you measure every day and you record your readings, and they'll make a decision based on that. So I wouldn't get too worried about a one-time measurement on an annual physical or something like that. Um, but back to your comment about the, wearables, I just saw something, where they're looking to update the, HERPA, which is the HIPAA security, and extend it to wearables. It's funny that you brought this up because I didn't have time to read the article, but it looks like that is gonna be an area of increasing concern because these devices, as you say, are collecting a lot of information about people. in your location, right? And then it's like a wearable tracker. In the old days, like the spy movies and things, they'd plant some bug on somebody's like pin or their shoe, and now you're doing it yourself, right?
I'd wear the
So
bug for the bad guys.
right, you're wearing the bug for you there, right? So having some security around that is increasingly important. Um, and I think there's a lot of people that are very mistrustful of this data, and having appropriate control measures to establish trust. I mean, we're dealing with it in the hospital. There's just so many layers of review that you have to go through before you can go live, right? It's not like, in the old days, we just, as a consumer, I just download a free software and try it. That's not happening, not in the hospital, right? Even now, I'll download an app on my phone, but I rely on Apple to, make sure that it's okay. But that kind of trust environment is key, right? And that's why, you know, we took a long look at this protections that we needed to have to ensure that we had proper cybersecurity, the right architecture, the right penetration testing, because there's no going back. All these news articles about hospitals getting hacked and the data getting sold for ransom and all that, they're all ultra sensitive for this. And so now, unfortunately, it's just a cost of doing business. You have to go that way, but frankly, it's the right way to do things.
I don't think too many of our too many of our prospects think the same way you do. A lot of people come to us when they get rejected by the FDA, and they're like, "Oh, maybe we should have thought about this before, but now we got to redo everything." So it's refreshing to hear a little of a bit of proactive approach, but also an approach that you realize this is also directly related to patient safety.
Yeah, I mean, look, our whole brand is about being proactive and patient safety. So,
Right,
it's
right.
sort of very mutually uh, reinforcing what we try to do. But, like we knew this was a regulation. Like, why go back and do it after the fact? You're just going to waste a lot of time.
Yeah, and we'll see a lot of times, like Christian was saying, companies will come to us and say, "Hey, we just got kicked back by the FDA." Oftentimes, we'll see letters come back from the FDA just saying, "Make sure you address cybersecurity concerns." They keep it that high level since there's so much that gets mishandled.
Wow.
Right now, cybersecurity is the number one reason that medical devices are getting kicked back. And so when we're seeing a lot of companies that I'm not exactly sure what the most common source would be, but we do see a mix of just not being aware of the exact regulations, not being aware of how important this can be. And then I think we're also seeing a little bit of a blend of people that are aware of this being a problem, manufacturers that are aware, but they don't know how severe it's going to be, and they don't know how seriously the regulators take it. They think they can prepare a couple of quick documents, say, hey, we ran this through a static checker when we were developing it in our development pipeline. Should be good to go. Here's the outcome of that. Here are a couple pages describing it. And then the FDA says, we were looking for something a little closer to woof. And then they provide the list of documentation, which for us is generally 150 to 600 pages of documentation that goes into it. So this isn't a small effort. And I do wish that a lot of more manufacturers would just have an understanding of how important it is to address this early, since you don't want to have to write 600 pages of documentation at the 11th hour and run the risk of some problem coming up in that process.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that dawned on me, I went to a few industry lectures on this, and is that you have to embed it in your culture. Software is not static. If you're used to the sort of world of hardware, whether you're on the capital side or, disposables, you set up your mold and you spit out product and it's the same mold for the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? Software, you're always iterating, you're always adding new functionality, and then you have to build in that sort of culture of, making sure that you're staying current. And that's not just on what you do, but if you make a new door, right, into your garden, so to speak, then you gotta test. check it, right? And so you have to revalidate all the time, and having the proper architecture makes it a lot easier. And so thinking about that up front, I believe helps save you a lot down the line, as opposed to sort of like just building some big firewall around everything. Because, yeah, I think that's, it's like, it's not the best design approach. Let's put it that way.
Really like your comment around building it into your culture. We did an episode not too long ago where we were talking about some of the talent gaps in medtech for engineers compared to, say, AI or crypto. Um, and partially, I think it is because a lot of, for better or worse, medtech is seen as this rigid, structured approach, even though software is such a dynamic and fluid just thing in general. And so a lot of these engineers and a lot of the talent that you're seeing get snatched up by all of these big tech companies, they're thinking about the software and the development culture of try to make something as quickly as possible, try to see what you can do. If it breaks, whatever, we'll fix it later. And you don't see the same in medtech. Things have to be slow, they have to be intentional. You said validation in a couple of ways, a couple of times, and it is possibly the most important word that you can use here. Validate the input and make sure that output is exactly as expected, and you need to have all the traceability going back. So I think that awareness and understanding is really important, and then realizing it's not like that everywhere else is important as well.
Yeah, it's not the same world of move fast and break things and minimum viable product and all that. You got to do that before you release the product. Once you release, it's got to be good and it's got to be reliable. Because in our case, people are making life and death decisions based on the numbers that we give them, right? I've had scenarios where people were in the OR and we saw a change before they saw blood pooling in the surgical field, where seconds mattered, and they had to initiate a mass transfusion protocol to bring the person back to life. Frankly, um, that number's got to be right, and it's got to respond, right. And if somebody's getting in there and they're monkeying with your system and then giving you the wrong information because they found a back door or whatever, your reputation is gone, right? That's it. It on one instance, and, you get that letter or it's in the news, and that's it. If somebody has a bug in Word or whatever, you issue a patch, right? Like, you lost the document, right? I'm trivializing it, but,
Yeah. That's a
by
good analogy. I like
comparison,
it.
it's not the same league.
It doesn't matter what document it is. Anything I have, I will give it up sooner than getting the wrong reading while I'm in the middle of a very major surgery.
There
And
that's it.
yeah, but no, you're exactly right. The stakes are higher in the med tech space. We have to do things correctly. There's no room for error where, like you said, a problem in Word, who cares? It's inconvenient at best.
And the other thing here is, we face this in med tech all the time, that, the war for talent. Like, yes, we're not paying, $100 million salaries like, Meta and some of these companies over that, AI expert. We're competing in a different space. Similarly, the people in hospital IT, there's some really great people, but the expectations and the demands on their time are such that you've got to make this as reliable and easy for them to implement as possible. Every IT department I've talked to, they have 9 months or 12 months worth of projects. And if your thing is not locked down and right and tight, they're gonna be like, okay, we'll get to you later, right? "Mm, Sorry, I have other things to do. Come back when you're ready for prime time."
Yeah, there's something you said earlier. I just want to kind of rewind to. You said it sort of in passing. I think you said companies should be built to be bought, not built to be sold, or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I, I know what
companies
you
get
mean as an
bought, not
entrepreneur, but
sold.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe you should expand upon that just for our audience understands because I think it was very well spoken.
When we started, the idea was get to FDA, and 15 years ago, FDA was, the milestone, and you could get acquired on that. And now I think with the consolidation in med tech, that particularly in monitoring, it's not about a clinical result, because there's no therapy here. It's information. It's about traction. And so, how much is enough traction? Is it repeat customers? Can you show that, in a particular area that the same people come back and continue to buy from you and you get that recurring revenue and that expansion in the hospital? Sure. Is there an absolute revenue number that they like to see? Sure. At some point, these companies have gotten so large that there's a thinking, well, what moves the needle for us? Right? Is it 10 million? Is it 20 million? Is it 50 million? Like, is the bar standard of care? Right? Like, it's a very kind of loose definition. And I've thought about this a lot. And sure, we're going to continue to drive the adoption of our technology, and we're going to continue to make it better and more indispensable in the hospital. You think about in tech, where people talked about making products that were insanely great and products that just worked. That, to me, is what will drive the sale, or the quote unquote exit. That people can't live without it. That's so ingrained. But, can you control that when somebody recognizes that? I control this side of the table. So I
Right.
figure we just keep building things that, people hug our monitors, right? Nurses, they get so passionate about taking care of their patients that our monitor helps them do their job so much better. They get very emotional about it. That tells me we're onto something.
The
That,
nurses actually like hug the monitor?
yeah, I have
Yeah, that's
photos of them hugging the monitor.
oh,
Like,
that's pretty cool.
literally,
That's like the best testimony you can have, really.
right? I mean, who does that, right? Like, right? So to me, that piece is what I keep in that pocket where I'm like, okay, this when I need to be cheered up, like, I keep that in that pocket. Um,
Yeah.
to remember that. That, and obviously when we've helped, catch patients in trouble, right? Those are the 2 things you hold on to. But we keep building the business, keep making, improvements in care through, the information that we provide, then I know good things will happen.
I like it. It's a great model. Well, we're coming up on time here. I usually ask for last minute words of advice or wisdom. And Trevor hasn't been smiling. I think he went to the dentist. Maybe that's why you're not smiling. Is that right, Trevor? Does your mouth hurt or something today?
I just got a new permanent retainer attached on my teeth.
A what?
A new permanent retainer. My old one snapped like 3 weeks ago. I just
Oh, I
got.
was wondering why your face looked a little bit different today. Then I thought, oh, he went to the dentist. So now it makes sense.
Yeah, it feels weird, so I keep messing with it, and so I'm like, kind of. But yeah.
So what's your departing words of wisdom, Trevor?
Well, I think more so than my typical, where it's around some statement. I think this is going to be what I want to see and what I expect to see coming up is that we're going to see shifts in the way that wearables are handled. I know we had a little segue into the conversation around wearables, but it definitely did get me thinking about how loosely regulated these are, how loosely controlled they are. There's no, I'm not even sure what information I'm supposed to get from these, honestly. And so I think we're going to be seeing a pretty big shift for some very impressive, very useful use cases for them. And as such, I hope that the safety and the regulations around it are soon to follow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And then, especially as these things become closer to what I would call clinical grade, right? And they're no longer wellness devices, and people go to their doctors and they say, "Look, I've been wearing this, I've been watching it," and people want to start to make decisions. Well, where is that data going, and how are we protecting it? And how are we validating that that data is any good? Right? What are the standards? They have to be updated. A lot of these cuffless blood pressure devices, you know, they make a lot of aggressive claims, shall we say, that are not supported by the data.
Yeah, and along the same theme, one of my concerns is so I have a skill that puts stuff on an app. I have a blood pressure thing. I do put stuff on an app. Is like at some point when I want to get a new life insurance policy, are they going to ask for all this data from these providers and then give me a health rating based on my own choice of using certain applications to measure my health. I just figure it's going to be used against me in some capacity at some point.
Well, I'll tell you what they're gonna do. They're not gonna ask for it. They're gonna say, "Well, if you volunteer it, right, then we'll give you a discount." Like, I got this from my, car insurer. They said they wanna put a tracker on my car, and they give me an extra 5 or 10% off. And they were tracking, how hard did I brake, and how far did I travel, and where was I? And then they were, optimizing, my insurance rates from that. So,
I
it's
definitely don't
already
want one of those on
happening.
my car.
It's already happening.
I
That's
have
true.
the same thing as tracking how hard I accelerate, brake, and all that stuff, and it has a terrible understanding of how steep the hills are here and how fast you need to accelerate to get up them.
Yeah, but these things get better and better, you know? So they didn't care. They're like, "Let's collect all the data, and then we're gonna compare you to the other, 1,000 people in your neighborhood who are going up that same hill every day." And then they're gonna be like, "Okay, this guy takes it faster. This guy takes it slower." That
Hmm. Yeah,
it's
that's
like
how interesting.
weather. Like, this massive supercomputer is gonna, like, completely, like, understand who you are.
Sounds like Skynet. It all comes back to Skynet.
Well, I was with somebody at Speed Vegas, and they have a track there. You can drive cars as fast as you want. And they had on their phone that 360 tracking app. And their friend got alert on the phone saying they were recklessly driving in an erratic manner. So their friend calls like, "What's going on?" They're like, "I'm at a racetrack, driving with an instructor." It's,
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It's impressive.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for joining us here. It's been a pleasure. And thanks as always, Trevor. Hope your mouth feels better. I know we have another recording later.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.